Welcome back, boils and ghouls. I've got a really special treat for you tonight, as long as we're actually recording this time. Uh, for anybody who's been following the channel, you know that I love independent books and I love a wide breadth of books. And one of the guys and one of the characters that opened my eyes up to all of the possibilities that comic books were capable of was Too Much Coffee Man. And I am super excited to have Shannon Wheeler on here tonight to talk with me and that we're actually recording this time. How are you doing again tonight?
Not too bad. And I thought of new jokes to tell, so we're all good.
I am so sorry, man.
No,
So
no more. No more apologies.
so at least I know where we're going this time. Um So, one of the important things about your career is that you're not just a comic book artist, you're also a cartoonist. You've worked in a plethora, just a myriad of different styles and storytelling formats. You originally started off in school working for your school paper, and that's where a lot of your original material would come from. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it started when the paper was coming out and would read it and there were the comics in there sucked. And then I found out that people were getting paid. And I thought, I I'm in. This is $10 a strip. That's $50 a week. That's a fortune. And they had a system where you go in and they vote on you. So you do your a few strips, and you'd stand up at the front of the room with other cartoonists, and they would grill you with questions and then vote whether or not you're in. And it took a year of doing that. At first, I was like, "Oh, this is going to be easy," and I kept applying until finally one of the fellow cartoonists, this older guy named Orush, from the Middle East, he's like, "Shannon, you've got to stop telling the truth. When people ask if you can draw women, you just say yes. You don't say that you are terrible." Like you're doing, stop telling them that you're terrible. Like it's just lie. When do you represent everybody? Yes, you represent everybody. Like this is what you've got to. So the next time I got up there and I did exactly what he said, and sure enough, I got voted in, and I still owe a debt to Arush for that um, sage advice of lying. But yeah, I did a strip. I started off doing single panels, gag strips, and then moved to doing a serialized story. And then moved to Texas, brought it there, worked at the Daily Texan, and met comic book people and started doing some comic books, mini comics first, and then comic books.
And the mini comics are something that's really, really cool. We've seen a push back to people doing self-published books, mini comics, zines, that kind of thing. They disappeared for a lot of years, for like a decade and a half or so there. But back in the 80s, they were an extremely important like stepping stone between doing amateur work, getting your stuff refined, getting your foot in the water, and then getting an actual product out there. For a lot of people, they don't necessarily hit on their best or most lasting idea with those mini comics, to say the least. It's usually a big growing experience. And I know you did small editions, like 300 copies, and they were always like 8-page books. Um,
Like 20 and 30 copies. And the nice thing is you could do different covers and different titles and test it out and see what works and do a lot of terrible things. And then I did the first set to promote. I met a printer and then he's like, "Oh, I'll print a book." And so we did a book, and then I did the mini comic as an idea that people could buy a thing for a quarter and like it and then come back and buy my book for $5. Um, but I did the mini comic as Too Much Coffee Man, And they're like, oh, is there more Too Much Coffee Man? Like, no, but it's the same stuff. It's just a different. They're like, oh, well, do a Too Much Coffee Man book, and I'll buy that. Oh, man, so yeah, it's a good way to test
Yeah,
and
and
learn.
and and I was gonna say it is interesting because Too Much Coffee Man did come from those original mini comics done in order to promote Jab, which you were doing with your own publishing imprint adhesive at the time. I know that you talked a little bit about like this awesome collaborative and kind of communal feeling that was going on at the time with you and a lot of your friends. Can you talk a little bit about Adhesive and how that led to the mini comics in support of Jab and Jab itself?
Yeah, we met each other, and I was doing the strip for the Austin for the Daily Texan, and that's where the people there, like Matt, uh, who was in there. Chris Ware was cartooning, Matt Madden, Walt Holcomb. It was just these. I thought I was pretty good at cartooning, and then I come to Texas and I fall in with people that were just light years beyond where I was. And so I just had to up my game a lot, and I had to learn real quickly. But then I met these other guys. One of my friends moved into this house with a printing press, and we all wanted to do comic books. And so we thought, oh, we'll just print our own comic books. And that's how we started Jab. And the idea was each of us would contribute to a small company, we'd print our comics and then pull out, whatever came out of it. So we started with the anthology, and then the idea was get that going, and then we'd each go into our own book. So like I did Too Much Coffee Man, my other friend did Eden Matrix. Martin was going to do a book with some superheroes. Um, Eventually we did I Beam with Sam Hurt, and we had a few other books. But Too Much Coffee Man is the one that hooked. And I was working at a video store, but the doing the comic book then just ended up it became a full-time job pretty quick once I started publishing a book with a hook to it.
And
It
that
was
was fun.
great. It was
Go ahead,
oh
go
yeah,
ahead.
92. I mean, I started 91, 92, and 93 is when um it started really rocking.
And
And
93 kind of brings us into the Converse commercial. And like, well, it's funny because like I don't think a lot of the younger viewers are going to necessarily key in on the importance of like a 20 or 30-second commercial, but at the time there was Rob fucking Liefeld and Shannon Wheeler who had these ads out, and it was crazy because like Rob was drawing, but he was drawing Spike Lee and doing all of this. What Too Much Coffee Man was in the Converse ad. Can you talk about how that happened?
they Converse just wanted alternative cartoonists, and so I don't know how my name came up, but the call that I got was from Harry from Houston Effler ad agency, and called in the morning, and so I was asleep on my couch, and the answering machine back in those days picks it up. So I'm listening to this guy, and my friends would always, we were messing with each other all the time, and so I thought it was a crank call, and he left a message saying, hey, this is Harry from Houston Eflin, blah blah blah. And he talked really fast, and so when I finally did get up and I called him back, and I copied his tone and cadence. So I was like, hey, this is Shannon Wheeler. Yeah, I'd love to do an ad for Converse. That sounds great. And I thought the whole thing was bullshit till they FedExed over a contract and checks. And it's like, oh, I guess this is. I mean, it was literally a week where I thought it was fake. My friends would all like I'd work at the video store, and they'd call up and sit say ask for Shannon Wheeler at that they're the sheriff from whatever nearby county, and they had a warrant, and they're looking, and so and but they would put on a sheriff voice, and I'd be like, no, Shannon Wheeler isn't here right now. He's like, I don't know, or ask me to look for movies like, do you have any black and white pornography movies? And I was like, I don't know. And so I'd have to go look, and no blowjobs. I don't want to see any blowjobs in the. And I don't know if the. So I'd have to ask, and then I was like, oh, damn it, is this Noah? It's like, but yeah. So I just assumed an ad for an ad agency was a gag. Um, but then I'm in an airplane. They fly me out to Vancouver to work with Danny Antonucci, who did Lupo the Butcher, and Ed, and Eddie is the what he, and so yeah, it was just a became real. And it was quick. I mean, we had a turnaround, I think, of 6 weeks or something. And he just banged it out and brought me back out for the sound. Um, it was a blast. And then it ran on Saturday Night Live, which at the time you had to watch it or record it on a VHR, VHS, VCR. It was before VCRs, but yeah, it was wild. Um, and yeah, that's when all of a sudden I started getting offers from agents to pitch a show, and then try to deal with Comedy Central. I mean, it led to saying no to a lot of stuff.
I Too Much Coffee Man was everywhere, dude. It was just like omnipresent for about like 5 or 6 years during this section of the 90s. It seemed like everywhere you turned, there was Too Much Coffee Man. And you made the transition to from Adhesive, your own publishing company, to working with Dark Horse, who's also collecting stuff around that time. Can you talk a little bit about the decision to start working with a more mainstream? Dark Horse isn't what I would consider like huge monstrous corporation, especially at the time, and they had some really great niche publications. So I'm curious how you got involved with them.
It was originally Dark Horse Presents. And so a friend of mine, she was working at DC Comics, and she was shooting pool with a guy in what was he doing at Dark Horse? I think he was in the merchandise department or something, but they were shooting pool talking about comics, obviously. And my name came up, and he's like, oh, Shannon would never want to do a thing for Dark Horse Presents. We're too corporate. And she said, are you kidding? He would kill to do that. And he's like, really? I'll bug him there. And so that's how that happened, was through a pool game and just name dropping. And then they got a call from Bob Schreck, who I had actually met at conventions. And then he called me up and was like, what are you doing going over my head to get stuff? I would have worked with you. And I was like, well, you should have, I don't know. And so did the Dark Horse Presents run. Um, and then they collected that into a book. And that's the Too Much Coffee Man Saves the Universe, um, which is, I think that's a title I'm going to use for the next little book collection. I'm trying to collect all my old stuff into a little set of books. Um, Too Much Coffee Man Saves the Universe and Other Bad Ideas, I think is what I want to call it. But yeah, so working with them was great. But uh, it was a time when corporate comics, mainstream comics, and underground comics were worlds apart. And partly, I think it was Fantagraphics that was really trying to set um, comics up as an art form. And they were trying to distance themselves from comics as pop culture. And those lines have blurred since then. And it's hard to imagine that kind of petty squabbling. But even in Mouse, and I think he's regretted it since then, but Spiegelman said that when he went on the talk show, I think he said that he did not draw comics. that he was doing a novel. And I think since then I know since then he said that he wishes that he hadn't made it, that he had just talked about comics and embraced it more. But yeah, it was a hard time for that. And so me and my friends, we we just loved comics, and we all grew up on superheroes, and we loved underground stuff, and we all had, we loved Crumb, and we loved, you know, the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers, and women's comics, all the stuff Dennis Kitchen published, and all this underground stuff was just the freedom we loved. And I th I think the energy and freedom was also there in the early Marvel stuff, which is what we keyed into both those things. I still love that. I still love comics.
I hope so. But one of the things that's so interesting about your career is your actual love of the medium. You don't seem to specifically love this or that. You really like comic books, and you've always had a kind of a community of people around you that's like-minded, and you've always fostered abilities, and you've ended up working with some really interesting people. And jumping forward a little bit, you self-published more issues of Too Much Coffee Man following the Dark Horse stuff for several years, and then you went to a magazine-sized format that was allowing you to kind of, and it felt like kind of rekindle that spirit of maybe 10 years prior, where you were really in the foxholes and working with everybody. Can you talk a little bit about how you ended up getting everybody? One of the interesting names for anybody who's not familiar, because I didn't know this, Yonan Vasquez actually ended up contributing to the magazine, and Yonan notoriously basically works for no one, and I've never heard it brought up in any of his biblios or anything.
I should probably mention it, use his name. I don't know. I hung out with him, hang out with all these people at comic book conventions, and then putting together the magazine. I'd moved, things had kind of petered out in Texas for me. I mean, or plateaued, I guess, and I felt like I was starting to repeat myself there. And then my girlfriend got pregnant and she didn't want to have kids in Texas. So we moved to Portland. And that's when I plugged in with Dark Horse too. I thought, oh, I've got a community there sort of without any work. It's already there for me. And but I and I thought, what, rather than trying to publish all these people and try to get something going like that, I thought a magazine was a way to publish other people's work, to do an anthology without calling it an anthology. And so that's what started that. And then I could go through magazine distributors and I could sell advertising as well. And I thought it would open things up in a nice way. And it did. Um and it was funny. I mean, like, some of the dumb ideas we had. I mean, it was neat to work with various people to pull in and run their strips. But what I really liked was, like, 9/11 happened, and then, how do you deal with that? And so we did it, like Humor is Dead, but we wanted to, um, how did we do it? I think a friend of mine proposed an article where he said that Bush was fighting for homosexual rights, that 9/11, because it was a dual phallic symbol, the Twin Towers, and that homophobia of the Middle East inspired the anger that made them bring down these twin phallic. So he had this whole theory and this whole article about that. I mean, it was just ridiculous. And I was like, this is hilarious. So then pulling in another artist to illustrate that, and then who do you get and how do you get that? And then I got somebody who did these kind of kid articles to do kid illustrations, to say, please don't hate buildings, um, hug your buildings. I mean, but it was done deadpan, the whole thing. And it was just funny. And that kind of marriage of text and image. Um, then we reviewed war. Then we went to war. So we did a war review, and we would review like World War I, which was kind of like Godfather, where it fits with World War II, which they're considered the best wars ever because we had a clear-cut villain and an arc. But we gave it, so that one gets like 4 tanks, and then Korea, which nobody really knows what that's about, and that only gets like a tank and a half because it's a muddled sort of an art film war. Um, just ideas like that, and then just running with it was, yeah, that's the product of sitting around with people and just making stuff up and being stupid.
That sounds also kind of like getting like, because I know you started off with single panel illustrations and then you moved into doing like stories with the panels, strips. And then that kind of evolved into the comic book. And for anybody who hasn't read, A Breath of Too Much Coffee, man, number one, get off your fucking ass right now, go buy it and read it. There is a ton of amazing collections of it that are out there, and I guarantee you won't be disappointed. They're dirt cheap. Like I don't even know what Shannon's think. They just give them away at this point. Um, I seriously, when I was researching, I was like, how the hell do they print these for so cheap? This is amazing. Because for years I was like, I can't afford it. My roof collapsed in my last place, and I lost all my too much coffee, man. And I was like, well, I guess that's gone because there's no way I'm replacing all those single issues at like $4 or $5 a pop with shipping. And all these collections are amazing. But for anybody who hasn't read your stuff, you have a real ability to play with storytelling. Sometimes it's a single illustration that tells a story. Sometimes it's 5 or 8 pages, like in your original mini comics that we were talking about, and sometimes it can just be a single page that's got a strip set up, that kind of follows its own dictated uh, flow, and it feels like you were kind of getting back to that also with the magazine of like integrating new and just interesting ideas and how to approach stuff in a new way after so many years.
It was fun. Yeah, I mean, but that play comes from, when I worked at the Daily Californian, and then I go to Texas, and then all of a sudden Chris Ware is playing with form in the student paper as well. And so the benchmark for trying to look at the structure of something is super high. I mean, he's a world class. And so just to get up, it just will, the water of his ability brought everybody else around him up higher as well. And, I think I've been lucky to be around some people that are very, very bright, much smarter than I am. And if you ever have a chance to work with people, always pull in people that are smarter than yourself, and it makes you look better every time.
Hey, man, that is a very wise words, very wise words, especially when you're going up against somebody like Chris Ware. Like
Yeah.
I'm just gonna do my best, man. So the narrative element of your work, kind of starting off as single strips or single panels, then moving into strips and then into comics, seems very like evolutionary, naturally evolutionary, like it was something that kind of seemed to come natural. I think for a lot of people that if you read even something like Thorn by Jeff Smith, where it's the
Mhm.
strips and then you compare it to Bone, you really see like how he struggled at some points, either working in the strip format or working in the comic book format. So I'm curious, how easy or difficult it was for you to make that transition yourself.
It was it was super hard. I mean, and yeah, you see Jeff just get better and better and better until he's just singing along, and his storytelling becomes so natural and looks so easy. No, for me, it was, I don't know if you know Jesse Michaels. He's a Operation Ivy underground punk rock band that's popular. So I um, I was hanging out with him at one point, and we're, I don't know, we're bullshitting about something or other, and and growing up in Berkeley, because we both grew up in Berkeley, and so he said, "Yeah, I think that we've done pretty well because we've worked really hard. Like we know people that are much, much smarter than we are, but like we've just worked at it." And I was like, "Yeah, like nodding along." And then he gets this look at me. "Oh no, I'm not trying to be insulting. I'm not trying." I was like, "No, you're exactly right. Like I know people in high school who scored perfect on the SAT and flunked out of high school, and then go to UC Berkeley and then flunk out of UC Berkeley. Like those are the people. Um, yeah, most of my friends are smarter than me, and I've only benefited, and I've always felt like catching up. And with doing comics, that's, I look at the strip and it's not like it comes natural. It's like, how do I do this? How do I do an establishing shot? How do I establish a character? And so in the first issue of Too Much Coffee Man, I'm trying to figure out, okay, I need an antagonist and they need to fight. Here's, it needs to have this story arc. And it just was so boring, these rules. And that's when I thought, oh, what if it's Too Much Coffee Man versus Too Much Coffee Man, and they're fighting with words? It becomes like a lawsuit, and that's the fight. And I thought, oh, cliche, like all these comics are so cliche. And that's when I thought Too Much Coffee Man fights a supervillain named Cliche, and there they're fighting using cliches. So it's out of sight, out of mind versus absence makes the heart grow fonder. Um, and so it's not knowing how to do it and then saying, oh, well, here's the rule that the committee tells you to follow, and then just going, yeah, that really is boring. Um, Not wanting to draw the fight scene, so I build up the whole comic to the fight scene, and then you turn the page and it's after the fight scene and they're talking about it. They're having like the post-mortem. Like that was close. Yeah, if we hadn't done this. And then they describe it in their, like, how they almost, the world almost destroyed, because the actual fight scene in comics is so boring most of the time. So yeah, it's a lack of ability that's made me figure out these things and work around, like what could be more interesting, because it's, I'm coming to it from a different place. I mean, same with, oh, we need to sell our comic and we need a gimmick. And all the gimmicks that were being done were holograms and weird ink or a three. I don't, they were just dumb and boring and stupid. But we thought, oh, we need to do one, but give the limitations of money, practicality. And if we had done something, it would have cost money and it would have been our profit margin, basically. And it wouldn't have sold because Marvel is already doing some gimmick that's better than we'll ever do. So it's like Ashley came up with ideas like, well, let's just shoot it with a gun. And and I mean that was, it was like, oh, this is brilliant, and three more beers. And it's like, starting to hear immediately why it won't work. Of like, well, it won't go through the comics. Oh, we can't aim it. Um, where will we do it? Where will we get the guns? And blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, we got a gun over there. Oh, we got some comics here. And now we're, three beers in. Like, let's go in the backyard. It's just a 22. And so we're like, yeah, it works fine. Look, we can shoot through about 10. Okay, let's do the napkin math. 5,000 comics. That's 500 shots. That'll take a day. And there'll be this many bullets. Yeah, it's $20. We can do this.
So I was just reading an article about the guys who made those Spider-Man hologram covers that were like came out, and I remember thinking they just looked so awful as a kid. And seeing all of the time and the effort and the money and the excruciating madness for building these like special relief models and having to shoot them and doing all this process. Fuck it, we're getting some beer, we're getting a gun, and we're gonna go shoot the shit out of this comic, and people are gonna fucking like it, is what they're gonna do.
and then and then and then take that idea and then go, yeah, let's charge more. Like we'll shoot it with a 9 millimeter. Charge more. Like what guns do we have? Like, oh, I've got a shotgun. Let's if we shoot it with a shotgun, we can charge $20, put it in a bag, and it's guaranteed unreadable. And this is before, coffining it. I mean, I don't know what I would do to make fun of those stupid sealed up books, but I don't. Somebody should make fun of that crap. It's so I hate collectability stuff so much. I don't know. So yeah, and we said it's the only comic book in history that went up in value as the condition goes down. So we charged $10 for the 45, and we charged $20 for the shotgun, and it was guaranteed unreadable. Came polybagged. It was so, I mean, the idea was like, let's take a dumb idea and then make it dumber. Like, let's see how far, but given the constraint, like we don't have money, and it's got to be funny. It can't be, you just don't, I don't know. It was fun. I like working in groups where it's a improv vibe where everybody's like, yes, and what do we do next? Like there's an affirmation
That's
of
interesting because
ideas.
like I was gonna say use the word absurdity and not in like a
Mm-hmm.
negative sense at all, but like that I love the absurd nature of most of the story content that you provide, but like the dialogue and the inner monologues that are happening and all of the storytelling is very personal and it's very different than anything else that you see in comic books. You eventually have moved from, single panel illustrations to strips to doing comics to doing those. I think as kind of being presented as miniseries in the with the idea of being collected, not necessarily, I would say, in the sense of a graphic novel in the pretentious sense, but a cohesive story that is meant to be absorbed that way on an even larger scale than just a 22-page book. And you've also telescoped back to doing single panel illustrations and strips and that kind of stuff for The Onion and most probably, notably, The New Yorker, which I'm not sure a lot of people are aware of. Can you talk a little bit about what interested you in moving back towards doing strips and panels?
Um, I, I for the Onion, they called me up and just said, "Hey, we've got a space. It's tiny. We want you to do something." And so I just did a tiny little strip for them. And there, I was just doing dumb gags because it's like a 1 by 2 inch space. And then, at some point, I had this idea. I wanted to do a dirty, not dirty, dirty, but it was like, uh, I was thinking about people eating at restaurants and salads, and then the waiter and the crap that they put on your salad. And I just thought, oh, what if you the waiter's holding a baby and he's saying, "Would you like some crap on your salad?" And I thought, oh, that's kind of, a little bit edgy. And so I asked my editor, I was like, "Hey, can I do this?" And he said, "Hey, we're the Onion, do anything you want." And so I started just doing more and more as dirty as I could get. Cartoons. So I started doing like bestiality and all that. I mean, my nature is pretty lightweight, so I'm, sort of like 50s working blue. I don't go hardcore underground, but even so, I mean, there's still, like a bestiality and incest. I tried to hit all the, no-nos
I
I
tried to hit
could
all the benchmarks.
until one. I think I had one where somebody's throwing up on a woman, and oh no, she's throwing up on him, and he's leaning forward and saying, I said blow job, not blow chunks. And I don't know why that one bothered he's like, yeah, I don't know this one. I'm just, do you have anything? And I was like, yeah, whatever. Um, but that was, yeah, it was fun to like, it just opened up to me. And I was like, I'm going to figure out how to do this and figure what can you do in a 1 by 2 inch space in the onion, and played with it. And with the New Yorker, it was seeing Matt Diffie, who gave a talk in Portland at a book fair, and I just thought, oh, this guy's a New Yorker cartoonist. He might be able to tell me how to do this. And he said, call me up and I'll talk to you about it if you're interested. And so I called him up, and he said if I wanted to, I could send him cartoons and he would critique them for me and help me, figure out the rules of the game, because it's a different structure than, and I really had to look at it then of like, what is the puzzle of doing a New Yorker cartoon and it was tough because part of me was like, oh, I know how to do this. This is easy. But then another part's like, he would say, yeah, this one isn't funny. This is a pun. This doesn't tell any story. And I started, deconstructing it in a way to figure out a New Yorker cartoon. The ones that really work are the ones that tell a narrative. And so how to do a cartoon, like a pun is a closed little system. And it's just like, oh, I've noticed that these two words are similar. And then it, it's just a closed joke. And I mean, it's fine, but that's what most people do when they're doing the caption contest or something. But learning to tell a narrative inside of a single panel, it's an art that, um, I mean, thank God Diffie was there to help me kind of break that apart. I just like the challenge, and it was such a pleasure to. And then you go through all these stages too of thinking, um, oh, I'm genius. Oh, I'm an idiot. Um, I I can't do this. Oh, why aren't I recognized? I mean, like it's just a roller coaster. Um, but you work at it every day, and then when you finally get one that's okay, you're like, oh, I see what I can do and where I can go with this. And it's when you have something that's good, it just rings a bell inside that I really cherish. And
You've
ideally,
pr-
that's what I live for. What's that?
you've produced some absolutely incredible work for it. Back in 1995, if I remember the year right, Too Much Coffee Man won the Eisner for Best New Series. And I remember being very excited about it at the time because
That's sweet.
well, it was a validation of like I had made this big conscious decision. I was working and I grew up very poor and I was I say working. I was volunteering in a shop for money off of comic books. And the guy who owned the shop kind of took me under his wing and he showed me all of the old, he had a full run of EC comics. He had a full run of the Archie horror stuff. And like he was showing me CC Beck stuff, the original Marvel stuff that was just blowing my mind. And he really showed me like the breadth of what superheroes were capable of. And this is like heading towards the end of the 80s when there was some really interesting writing, but the industry was obviously fucking dying. And like 91, 92 comes around, Image happens. I
Yep.
was not on board. I could not get still don't understand like why people enjoy like Spawn and there were books like The Max. I loved that book. It looked
Max is
great,
great.
but there was a huge fucking subtext going on in that book where it was obviously telling you like, hey, by the way, I am not a superhero comic book. And like Too Much Coffee Man coming in and really getting that same sort of validation of like this series is real, it stands on its own, it's not just about gags or strips or illustrations. And years later, you took all of your collected stuff that was rejected by the New Yorker and you compiled all of that in what I think 2010 or 2011,
Yeah. Yeah.
released that. I love the name. I thought you would be funnier, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And and I love it because even though it was not on the ballot, you ended up taking the Eisner that year for that title, man.
Well, that when the ballot first came out, it was the first year they did digital, and then at first I was completely bummed, and I called up a buddy of mine who's working at Boom, and and I was like, oh no, and then we're talking, and actually as the phone was ringing, I realized this puts me in a David Goliath where now have an article. This is going to win me the Eisner, is what I realized. Because then people have something to talk about. You have a hook of, oh, I got left off the ballot. Look at me. And so it gives you an advantage that you wouldn't have had otherwise, which I wish I didn't think that way, but you know, and and the phone's ringing, and I realized that, and and Chip, my buddy, answers, and he's like, "We've won," and I was like, "I know." That's why you have friends that are smarter than you, because they are on board and they're going to run with something. And he was able to leverage getting articles about like me being the underdog, which allows you to dominate. I mean, it's sad but true.
Well, it doesn't hurt that the fucking greats book, or the book is great
I,
too.
I appreciate it. Thank you. It was fun.
Um,
Yeah.
so, bouncing around a little bit, during the mid 90s to the late 90s, Too Much Coffee Man really it was one of those omnipresent things. You would turn around and you would see a lot of just illustrations in different places. You have always been an extremely busy guy doing covers, pieces for everybody. You love collaboration. So, and
Yeah.
so you're always out there doing stuff. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like during the collapse of the speculators boom around 97 to 98, which a lot of creators tapped, man. A lot of
Yeah.
creators that had been in the industry 15, 20 years at that point were like, I'm out. I can't handle this. Can you talk a little bit about making the transition there?
I mean, it was when I moved to Texas, um, when I was a kid, I loved Garfield. And then finding Fat Freddy's cat was like taking acid for the first time because he deconstructed humor and comics in a way that gave me a direction. And all of a sudden, I was like, this is what it's about. Then when I moved to Texas, um, I'm going to visit a girlfriend in France, and my uncle said, "Hey, while you're over there, can you give Gilbert these photos?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." And and then I was like, "Wait, Gilbert Shelton, like Fabulous Furry Freak Brother Gilbert?" He's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. I used to, friends with him." It's like, oh, which then explains why my mom had his comics when I was a kid. So I go to Paris and I have coffee with him, and um give him stuff, and we're chatting and about comics because I'm like, yeah, I want to do this. And he said that he would do he gave me the template and he said, do these single page strips, put those in newspapers. Then you take those single page strips and you collect that into a comic book. Then you take the comic books and you collect that into a book collection. That way you get paid 3 times for the single drawing. It goes, that's how you make a living. And so that's what I learned is like you need to diversify and not be in a speculator's market, not go like do a bunch of stuff, do it all over the place, have a lot of little fires in a lot of different places. And it was Gilbert's advice that I tried to follow. And so when something like the New Yorker opens up, I'm like, this is interesting. It's a challenge. It's it's a way to diversify and learn a new aspect of art. And that's always what I'm trying to shift around and like what can I do that keeps me interested and engaged. And some people have said they're like, hey, doing comics and underground comics, that's like, punk rock or whatever, and you do what you want. You do anything you want, but then the New Yorker, like, is that selling out? And I'm like, no, the New Yorker is playing jazz. Like this, it has these rules and you're working with this, but then you have this complete freedom. I was like, playing CBGBs, you're going to play, you're going to do your, Talking Heads or Ramones. I mean, like that CBGBs for that. You go to Blue Note and you're going to do Miles Davis, and this is, it's both music and being able to move is is really interesting. Like there's just different rules for different venues.
It's just incredible how well you've mastered the rules. Because there's also a unifying nature about your work that has never changed. Like, I feel as much as you're able to mold yourself and put yourself into whatever headspace or position that you need to be to provide a certain type of work, it's always undeniably Shannon Wheeler, and you're never, well, you don't ever compromise on that, dude. And I really respect the fact that in a like in our generation, there was a lot of like you could get shitty feedback from letters and that kind of stuff, but there was no internet where you're instantaneously getting fucking feedback where people are literally telling you to be a different person. And so, like,
Yeah.
to have this unifying personality that goes across the Onion, the New Yorker, like all these, like self-published books, Dark Horse, you worked with Fantagraphics, like, I mean, I
Yeah.
could go on and on. Like, how have you maintained the ability to create a singular voice while still adapting to all of those mediums? Is that something that you're conscious of?
No, I mean the only thing that I want to do going into it is this thing going to be fun? Do I like this? Is it something I believe in? And so even doing like I took the Mueller report and we did that as a graphic novel, which is the worst selling book I've ever done. But I thought, I want to do this. This is fun and interesting, and I want to learn about, or the Bible with Mark. I mean, that was something I wanted to learn about the Bible. And I thought, how do I learn the Bible without reading this boring book? And I thought, oh, I'll get somebody else to read it for me, simplify it. I'll just draw some cartoons. And so I had Mark do all the work. And yeah, and now I'm still super proud of the Bible book that we did together,
Did
which is
you
funny and interesting.
did you get any backlash off of that? I loved that book. I thought it was hilarious, and it wasn't mean-spirited too, which I also appreciated because it could have been just a nasty. Reading the synopsis, I was like, this is either gonna be great, it's gonna be a fucking disaster piece. But it was Shannon Wheeler, and I was like, I have to take that dive. I was curious, like, what the reception to that book was.
Um, and this is where working with a committee can either, be good and bad. But the ad guy was like, "Hey, let's try to get controversy, and that'll get us sales." And it's like, whatever. Um, and that did not work at all. It felt wrong because it isn't mean spirited. We weren't trying to do a takedown. My going into it is, hey, this is a piece of literature that is really significant, and I want to understand it. And Mark went into it with he was raised with it, and so he was raised Pentecostal, and he felt like he already knew it. But then he said, going back and really trying to read it, he realized how much they cherry picked pieces of it. Uh, so backlash, no. actually, I think the intention is because we weren't doing a teardown. It really, for both of us, was coming from a good place, and we've stuck to that. At a convention, um, what I tell people is, hey, you know, read one or two pages, and if you like it, great. If you don't, no problem. But it, the one time I got yelled at is a woman coming up and she's yelling at it, and I told her that. I said, pick it up, just read it. And she's like, no, I'm not going to touch it. This is wrong. This is evil. And she's pounding on the table. And people are kind of, it's at San Diego Comic Convention, and then I was like, look, I'm really not trying to offend. It was not coming from a bad place. And then she said, religion is evil. Anybody that promotes religion in any way at all is bad. She's like, I'm an atheist and this is wrong. Every, the little group of people that was around, everybody started laughing. I mean, like, I was like trying to, well, it was pretty great. That's the one time I've been yelled at, was an angry atheist.
I just
So,
I just know when you touch on that stuff, like Mike Allred is one of my favorite guys
oh, he's
ever.
great.
And I I think with Mike, it might have been a double fold realization that like Mike was, raised Mormon, and like a lot of people I don't think were necessarily aware of that. But like his presentation of the material was also extremely tasteful. That
Yeah.
fucking hobbled him for several years.
Which is such a shame, because I firmly believe people can believe what they want. I mean, I what I don't believe is that people should use their beliefs as a weapon. I think that is absolutely wrong. But that's different than believing in something. Like, Mike is a sweetheart and I'll hang out with him anytime
Dude,
you
I
ask.
I flew out to his house and met him last year and got to hang out with him and Laura and Han and his whole family actually. Like I got to have family dinner. I fell in love with that whole family, man.
Yeah.
Laura is such a sweetheart and Han is a great kid. Like, I just, it was really hard for me to know, like, when I was talking to him, that his career took such a heavy hit over being honest with people and provide. It was a lot like your work. It wasn't a fucking piss take, and it
Right.
wasn't like a stupid, like, way over the top cartoonish thing. So I was just very curious what like your reception had been, because you come from a whole different world, you know.
But yeah, and I didn't know religion. um, I grew up in Berkeley, and so I wasn't wounded by it the way a lot of people are wounded by it. But I do, I do want to understand it, and I don't, uh, and I think that it's a lot of ideas that have influenced society profoundly, and I want to understand that. And it's interesting going through the Bible, going, oh, this this movie that I like stole that from the, like, half the, if not more, the storytelling is just retelling Bible stories, and it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense, and okay, this works for that. And yeah, I don't know. The divide and conquer, I think, is what I think Foucault talks about, that of, let's break up society into these factions so that they argue with themselves, and that's a way that powers above can control and dominate. Um, so that, I don't know. Superheroes and undergrounds, I think that there's no reason for there to be divisions. And
No, yeah,
Jesse
yeah.
did that with ska and punk rock. I mean, like, when he had his band, like, he pulled together, like, he took ska and pulled it with the punks, and the ska kids were all fighting, and then he's like, no, we're all there. Like, come, we'll play this music, and everybody, he had a nice message, that and a way to unify these things. I really like that. I don't know. I like it a lot.
So you were talking a little bit earlier about having a lot of small fires going, a lot of stuff going on. post like 98 to 2000, like comic work was slowing down a little bit, but you were doing a
Yeah.
ton of anthology work. Like I still saw you
Yeah.
popping up freaking everywhere with illustrations for this guy or a story for that or a back cover for this. Well, dude, I mean, that was in a time where most people were struggling to get cover work even as really high names, and I think it says a lot about your work. Can you speak a little bit about what I'm curious about is I have a lot of guys that make comics that watch the channel, and the diversity in your career and your ability to like multitask and do different stuff at the same time is really incredible. So I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit about how you were dealing with that complete post collapse in like
Yeah.
2001, 2002.
I think I was unaware of it first. I just had my kids. Um, and I think I started going through a breakup around 2003. 98 is when um, twins were born. And so actually, no, I think that's when I sort of lied my way into an animation job at Will Vinton Studios. They're now Leica and doing stuff, but I went, yeah, so I worked a gig in animation for a couple of years at that time. That's what I did.
I did
It's
not know that.
Yeah, I went in, I met a guy at a party and we were talking. I was like, "Oh, I need a job." And he's like, "Oh, I work for Will Vinton. You should come in." So I went in and I was like, "Yeah, I could do storyboarding. And that would be in my wheelhouse." And the woman there said that they had a lot of storyboard artists, but would had I done animation? And I had in eighth grade, I'd done a lot of claymation and stuff. So I was like, yeah, I have. And then she goes, um, oh, do you have a reel? And I thought, yeah, I've got this Super 8 little thing. And then I realized what she meant, like she not like a so I was like, oh yeah, but it's still packed up because I moved here recently. And she goes, oh, well, so and so, the guy that I met at the party like 2 days before vouched for me. She's like, oh, just come in for the animators test. Can you do that? And I was like, yeah, that's fine. And so I just went in. I called up my friend that was working for Vinton, J.R. Williams, and I said, hey, I've got this animators test coming up. Can you, first I said, can you teach me how to do this puppet animation, claymation? And he was like, yeah, sure. If you want to come in and stuff. And I was like, oh, well, yeah, I've kind of got a job interview. I did that and I'm going in for the test. He goes, when are you going in for the test? I was like, Monday. So I had a weekend. He's like, okay. I had Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And he said when I first came in, I was terrible, but it was like studying for the bar. Like he's like, this is how to do tracking. This is how to do a walk cycle. And then I'd go home at night. I bought animation books and I was reading them. I had the PJs, which was the animated show, and I would single frame advance it. And then I would trace to say how much space for each movement. Um, and then I'd go in the next day and he'd show me how to do a bounce, ease in and ease out, how to these little tricks of like you magnetize the feet down, um, and then how to swap out these little wax mouths. And then he said he's never seen anybody learn so fast. And I was like, yeah, I was scared shitless. Like I
Holy shit.
so Monday I go in for the test and they're like, yeah, this is great. Like I learned they're like, have you ever used one of these uh before? Because they have a little Apple box. It was like a little screen grab thing and a video camera. And you could frame advance. You had your screen and take a little thing, move your puppet. And I was like, yeah, I've used one yesterday. but then, they're like, yeah, you start working. And so I did. And at first, like I would go in and I would just complete adrenaline, and it was like somebody would walk in the room and they'd say a line, and then it was two people and they're in conversation, then there's four people, and then all of a sudden it's a party. I was doing animating a party scene, and I almost had a nervous breakdown because you track every little part of a puppet. And so, like a walk cycle, there's, the hands, the feet, the hips, the shoulders, the head. So you've got maybe 8 points of articulation that you're tracking to make sure they're all kind of flowing the way they're supposed to. And then you've got two puppets. So then you've got 16 points. And then you've got eight puppets. And you have to know when you've started the blink on puppet three. And I was just crying, just every day crying.
Jesus, man. I can't imagine the PJs being the first show that you ever worked on with that stuff. Oh my God. Because that was like, for anybody who doesn't know, like PJs is like about a tenement building. So, like, crowd shots and like having a bunch of people in a room just out of nowhere was like par for course for that show. Holy crap, man.
It was
A
it was high
weekend?
standards. And I mean the neat thing is like working with the people that were working on Nightmare Before Christmas, and it was the just amazing animators, and all of those people too were just really, really bright. They're like, oh, what are you doing this weekend? Oh, I'm going out with my band because we're recording a CD. Like, oh, you're a full animator. You can draw and write, and you play music and record CD. Like, how do you do this? How are you so smart? Like, and they're all like that, like just very, very capable human beings.
That's what I'm sitting here thinking about you. Because
No.
during this whole time, shut up, Shannon. Yes, because like this whole time, well, because this whole time, while the industry is kind of in a lot of ways, I think, winding down as far as floppies and that kind of stuff, there are some things that are happening that would, about 10 years later, really heavily impact the industry as far as repackaging material for widely accessible and discounted prices on trade paperbacks for perennial sellers like Sandman and a lot of other
Yeah.
stuff. The Saga, the Swamp Thing comes to mind. They
Hmm.
were just throwing this stuff out there, and it was the only the perennial classics, only the big sellers.
Yeah.
But they were starting to really forge a market into this collected taking this previously released material and then collecting it for a discounted
Yeah.
price for a new audience that may be new, it may have, or maybe younger, may have missed it the first time around, or it may be just cost prohibitive at this point. But
Yeah.
you, while you're doing this animation and single issues are disappearing, becoming less and less common for too much coffee, man. I would say not disappearing because I just don't think you've ever gone anywhere. But you were starting to make the transition into very, I think very wisely doing what Gilbert was talking about, and
Yeah.
getting these collections out and stuff. Was that something that you were thinking about, or were
Yeah.
people approaching
98.
you?
Yeah, that's why I went to Dark Horse, because I said, "Hey, let's put this in a book that will." I wanted to get into bookstores, and it was just starting to open up to graphic novels. Mouse really cut a path, and Image too. I mean, like that's an interesting thing of like the comics they did. They opened up the comic book market to independent books because it was all Marvel and DC, and then Image comes in, and then all of a sudden the store owners are looking at the catalog to buy their monthly comics, and they're looking past the two. All of a sudden there's three and four and five and six. And so there was room for Adhesive Comics for us to be in there and do that. Um, yeah, I was trying to do a book that would work in the bookstores, and I thought, yeah, these bookstores have coffee shops. There's got to be a way to, and I thought Dark Horse would help position me in there. It sort of worked, and then now, like printing, the print on demand stuff is kind of amazing in terms of it's like the mini comics that you were talking about earlier were the product of photocopy machines becoming ubiquitous, where you could go down the street and there'd be a photocopy store, and it was like having a printing press. And so you could produce mini comics in a way that you just couldn't do before then. Um, and it was great. I really, uh, yeah, I, I like that revolution where the technology leads. A little bit, I guess that's happening with web comics. I'm not as in touch with what's happening with that, but I like this idea of accessibility and where people can create stuff, and it's just this immediate. I mean, it's a two-edged sword of the feedback, because on one hand, you want to know what works and doesn't, and then kind of shift. Um, and yeah, now, yeah, the graphic novels that now all of a sudden every bookstore is having graphic novels. I wish I wish I could figure out how to make more money off of the digital comics. But I don't know.
If
It's
Green
fine.
Day ain't making money off of people streaming their fucking digital music, I don't think there's much hope for like digital like photograph, like
Yeah.
creators like that. That's one of the things. Well, I'm dyslexic and dysgraphic to an extreme extent. I didn't learn to read or write until I was in like fifth grade. Very late, was undiagnosed. People knew I was not didn't need to go to special ed, but there was something wrong with me. Comics are what finally allowed me to place movement with words and figure out
Oh,
what the hell was happening.
beautiful. I love
I
it.
oh, it is. I one day I will meet Sam Keith and shake his hand and tell him thank you because his art was so beautiful. Incredible Hulk 368. I sat for an entire weekend and just beat my head against the wall until I could figure it out. And he drew that with Kelly Jones, and I had Kelly on, and I
Yeah,
told him thank you, and it was just a huge thing. So they mean a lot to me, and
I
for me
love it.
digitally, when I look at them, I literally get seasick. I can't follow a page like I can physically. So it really hurts me. Nothing against digital creators. That's not meant as a slight, but it just
I'm with you. I love
nothing
the
seems
print.
optimal about the situation.
There's something, I don't know. There's things that you can do with print that I love playing with the form um of a print magazine. Yeah, it's interesting to me, and more than the digital stuff. But I haven't. I think I Homestuck. Supposedly, that's what my kids are telling me is like, oh, he's really playing with form, and I'm like, oh, that's cool because he'll do like video game stuff. But I haven't done a deep dive to deconstruct it. Um, but I I like comics and I like the printed medium, and I think that there's something magical in them that
There
I don't
is
want to leave.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
gonna say there is for me. I've heard it echoed. I always kind of felt like very alone. Like I didn't know how isolated my experience with books has been. And I try to be very honest about that, even though it's kind of embarrassing to say I didn't learn to read until I was in fifth grade. It's a very empowering thing to say that comic books, this thing that people like to shit all over, and an incredible fucking Hulk comic book nonetheless, not like some mouse or anything that you can this great work of it was just beautiful Hulk art. And I wanted to know what it meant. And I've heard a lot of people repeat that stuff. And that's, I think another part of why Too Much Coffee Man was so important to me is because as soon as I did learn to read, I went nuts. I was straight into Shakespeare and Salinger and like exploring the classics. And when I was reading comic books, it was like everything was punching down to me. But when I found Too Much Coffee, man, I was talking with somebody that understood me.
Oh,
And
that's really
that's
sweet.
well, that's I was gonna say, I think it's something that I had never really quantified, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to thank you enough for, but it was like having a conversation with another intelligent person that realized what was going on with the medium, that rose above the bullshit and told his stories in a way that represented himself and his art as best as he possibly could on every single project that I ever saw you involved with.
I I I don't want to be ashamed. I've done a lot of stuff that is in retrospect embarrassing, but every time I do it, then later I just end up even even on the Dark Horse when I collected the Too Much Coffee Man Saves the Universe, I I wanted to have him sitting alone in his room and just and that's just having that contrast of Too Much Coffee Man Saves the Universe and he's just sitting there in this kind of empty room and he's just looking depressed. And I thought that was funny. And but my editor at Dark Horse um, just pushed me. He's like, no, it's got to be active. It's got to be this. And I was like, okay, like, and I did what he wanted. And even now, I still it hurts me. So it's nice to revisit that. But it's Gilbert Shelton who treated me that way. I mean, I feel Concrete was another book that I read, and I was like, this is a great book. So I wrote Chadwick a fan letter about 2 weeks ago, and we started corresponding because I just got to thank him, and I was like, this is what the industry should be about is thanking somebody, and I think that's and maybe we're healing the wounds of the 90s where there's that division of you know, Catholic and Protestant or something, that weird fighting of inside comics. I don't know, but it's been, yeah, it reading something like Concrete was a big influence. It's like you can be sincere with your comic and like Gilbert stuff, the rules that he broke were just like the like Fat Freddy's cat. And then all of a sudden there's two of them and they fight and then they both get thrown out because Fat Freddy can't tell them apart and he doesn't know which one is his cat. And then there's eight of them outside the door and one of them saying, "You almost today's Tuesday, it's my day. Wednesday is your day. You almost blew it for all of us." And I've been reading Fat Freddy's Cat for like, this is like 1,000 pages in. And it's like, wait a second, there's not just one cat, there's eight. Like it just I was like, he was messing with me, in the narrative in a way that I just like, wow, that's beautiful. I just loved it.
He's brilliant,
Anyway,
man. I grew up on Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers and like got into everything else that they did. Like he is a brilliant storyteller, man. Um, so getting a little bit more back to, your career, the evolution of things, you did go into doing stop motion animation.
yeah,
And I know that there was also the ill-fated Cartoon Network animated series that you guys put a lot of work in,
yeah,
ultimately that fizzled out. Um,
and thank God it did. And I never understood that when I'd meet creators and they would say, "Oh, I had this cartoon going and or a movie and just I'm really glad it never happened." And I always thought that's stupid because you can always make this thing and then use it as a stepping stone for your next piece. And then I was doing this thing and it just started to become bad. Like there were these sexist jokes in there that really bothered me and it was kind of like using I don't know, it just a lot of the humor I thought was kind of mean-spirited and in a way that I didn't like and it just didn't feel right. And they were playing on like stupidity is the punchline or I don't know, there's nothing and the plots were all kind of set up, and it was very linear in a way that was really boring. And I thought and it was starting to suck. And I was seeing my character be mean, and I was like, Too Much Coffee Man isn't mean, and the espresso guy, like, there's that can't be it. That's not the humor. And I just thought, please let this die. And then thankfully, like, there was a regime change at Comedy Central, and so when somebody leaves and a new person comes in, there's usually kind of a clean sweep of the projects. And I was one of the projects that got swept out. And I was like, oh, now I'm one of those guys who's appreciative that the project died when it did. Um, one of the things Paul Chadwick said to me is like, we should talk about our Hollywood experiences. I was like, yeah, I would really appreciate it, because that guy has, I mean, his comics to me, they ring true and sincere in a way, and I can see what the committee would do to break that apart and make it suck. Um,
There's no way they're going to hone in on what makes that series special, which is Chadwick's ability to speak of his humanity through this inhumane creature. Like, like, because Concrete is so much everything about humanity personified and kind of dialed up to 11, but absolutely, literally, quite literally alien and
right.
indestructible and immortal. And like, there's no way they're going to deal with the
No.
complexities of any of that. He's going to be a big walking wall of concrete. He's going to get into a fight with aliens. There's going to be action
Yeah.
scenes and that was like what was always amazing about Concrete is like, nope, it's just a slice of life. It's just a guy
Yeah.
who's got an indestructible body.
The pathos. One of my favorite um, oh, Marvel two-in-ones with the Thing is where he and Sandman end up running into each other, and they're about to fight, and instead they have a beer together and they kind of have this long conversation. And it was like, I've held on to that as like kind of this platonic ideal in my head of how to do a fight in comics, is like, no, let them talk and work this out.
That's interesting because that's how so much of your stuff is resolved is through like words and resolution. And it seems very much in fitting with your personality and how you deal with the world and kind of process stuff and naturally evolve to fit the situation through rationalization and being able to take the world and process and quantify it in a way that not sure a lot of other people are able to do. Um, Even though the cartoon went the way of the dinosaur, that would not be the last adaptation of Too Much Coffee Man that anyone would see. And 2006, I think, was when the first run was of the Too Much Coffee Man opera.
Yeah, yeah. A friend of the family, and he tells the story different. He says that I bugged him, but he, my version of the story is that, like, we'd have Thanksgiving and he'd be over, and he writes operas, and he said, oh, we should do a Too Much Coffee Man opera, and I just always thought that's stupid. Um, how would we do it? I don't know how to write it. Um, where would we put it on? Like, all these things, and then it was, I don't know, a year. At one point, I had a dream with Too Much Coffee Man singing, um, and I woke up and I was like, oh man, if only I knew a musician who wanted to do. And then and then, it took me half a day, and because I was thinking about it all day, the dream. And then I was like, oh, Danny knows how to do this. He's been wanting to do this for years. So I said, how do we do this? And he said, send me a libretto. So I had to look up what libretto meant. And he said, yeah, just do rhyming couplets. And I was like, okay. I had to look up what rhyming couplets were. And I always liked um, Laurie Anderson bit where she would, I think like Walking and Falling, like she'll do a song where she'll give a word and then another word, and it sounds like the end of the sentence, but then add another word and it changes the meaning. So each time she adds the word, it it's changing the song and the meaning. I just I like her play on that, and I thought, oh, I could do something like that with love. And if I wrote a love song to love, so I sent Carrie or Danny that, um, love, I love loving love. And where it's not that he's loving somebody else, it's like that he's in love with this idea of love. Um, and then he sent back music that fit with it, and he paused it in the Laurie Anderson way that I had intended, so that it kept adding and changing meaning as it goes. And I was like, holy crap, I could work with this guy and play on this and make this work. And then I pulled in another friend of mine who is a poet, and a cartoonist, and I said, hey, if I start writing this, can you turn it into couplets, like rhyme it in ways? And he's like, yeah. And so he started doing, and then he was a really good collaborator. So I was like, this is great. I don't have to do any work when you get right down to it. Like, I'll just put these two guys together, let, let it go, and then I'll get all the credit for this product, for this opera. Um, so that was rolling along. And then somebody in Texas said that they had a production place and that they could do the music. So all of a sudden I had a house there that would put it on. So I was like, okay, we'll finish this up. And and we worked on the opera and like put it into full steam. And then that's about when the Onion was like, yeah, we want to run your strip. And I was like, oh my God. And then I was dating a ballerina from the Upper West Side in New York. I was like, this is like life. This is perfect. Like, how can what more can you ask for? And then she broke up with me. The place in Austin that was going to put on the opera burned down. And then the Onion said, hey, we want to run your stuff, but we don't know when, which is the classic way to, you know, get the, you know, pink slip or whatever. It's a classic rejection. So it all fell apart. And yeah, that's how quick it can turn on a dime. And then I was totally depressed. And then I went to a friend's um, art show, which happened. I didn't realize this. I'm like walking there. It was at the place where the ballet performed. So there was posters of my ex like everywhere. So I just start drinking and I'm like, yeah, and I'm chatting with this lady and I was like, she's like, what do you do? And I was like, I draw cartoon. I was like, what do you do? And she said, oh, I organize events for the space. Um, I put on, whatever, this and that, and, whatever. There's five, it's the Center Performing Arts. And I said, oh, I just wrote an opera. But so then I started pitching her. Like the next morning I woke up and I was like, what did I do? And then so I thought, okay, either I step through this window and I follow through on this, or I let it die as any normal person would just let it die. And I thought, no, I'm too depressed to do nothing. So I'm going to step up and so I started sending her um, the score, the libretto, which is the words. Um, I, I, she's like, oh yeah, we might be able to put this on in the Brunish, which is one of their stages. So I snuck in, I broke in, I measured it out, and I built a model of it with a little stage, and I made little people, and I would take pictures of it as though the opera was happening. So like this is how I want to set up the space to make the thing. I designed all the costumes and my plan was every Monday I sent her a new set. I hired three musicians to play the piano and sing. Um, and record it. So I sent her a recording every Monday, a new thing to say, this is where it's going. This is what it'll look like. This is what it'll sound like. This is where I am on this. And and then she was like, yeah, we'll do this. Here's a date. We can open it. And then I had to find people to help with it. And then so then I'm having a meeting and she's like, you don't know what you're doing. Do you have a producer? And I was like, no, I don't know what they do. And she goes, let me hook you up with some of these people to help this happen. And so she's like, just it was kindness of strangers, I guess. It's benevolence. It's working with people smarter than yourself. And um, yeah, opening night, I had worked so hard. I was like sitting in the back, and Stacy comes out in the Too Much Coffee Man thing, and there's the preamble where they, like in old movies, where they play a little snippet of each piece of the music to give you an idea of what's going to happen. And it's not Rossini with coffee words to it. I mean, it's interesting, it's melodic, but he plays with tempo and keys, and so it sounds it's a weird music that's odd, has an odd rhythm, and like Laurie Anderson, where it's like, I don't know what I'm getting, and I could feel the tension. And I realized, I was like, this could be the worst night of my life. Like, this is not drawing a bad cartoon. And everybody's like, oh, this sucks. This is sitting in a room full of hundreds of people watching this thing, and it could be terrible. I was like, this could be horrible. Like, this could, like, what have I done? And there was tension. And then people had to learn, they're like, is this opera that we're supposed to listen to and take seriously, or is this funny? And then like the first bit where he's doing the I love love, there's a pause and somebody laughed and it broke the room. And then they found the rhythm. They learned where and how to laugh. And then there's like a call and response of the stage and the audience where there were pauses for laughter. And it it came together. And then people, like, this sigh of relief where people just were like, oh, this doesn't suck. And then, and Danny built it, and it has this nice climax, where it goes from these minor keys and then this resolution. I mean, it it's a real opera. I'm really, really proud of it. It's another one of those things where I just feel like this thing really works in this odd way. The superhero song where the storyline is Too Much Coffee Man basically stalks the barista, and he falls in love with her. First he loves love, then he loves coffee, then he loves the barista, which, he doesn't know her. So it's just he's just stalking her and projecting all of his own feelings onto somebody he doesn't know. Um, and then Espresso Guy competes for Too Much Coffee Man's love for the barista, and then she's like, finally realizes that these guys are just stalkers, and she's like, screw you, and decides to be a superhero on her own. And she's like, I don't need you or any of this. And that, but it moves from these minor dissonant keys into this major, and it resolves all these things that it's like you don't even realize that there'd been this tension musically that had been set up until that piece, and then all of a sudden it's like this. It's just beautiful. I mean, I really appreciate the structure.
That sounds incredible, man. Like the amount of, well, I don't know what I expected when I read about Too Much Coffee Man opera, but the way that you analytically and intelligently approach every bit of your work, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm glad to hear it was or at least it sounds like to me that it was overall a very positive experience for you despite all the initial setbacks and stuff. Did you take a lot away from that? Like it seems to me that if you can pull off an opera, you have maybe a little bit more faith in yourself about I don't know, drawing something or whatever the fuck you do.
It was hard. I had gone to San Diego and I was getting a hernia. Um, and like I thought I had cancer because you get this little uh, okay, yeah. Oh, I thought we were freezing again. Yeah, you get a little polyp, and I was like, I'm gonna die. And then I go to the doctor, and he's like, "Oh no, this is just a hernia. Um, not a big deal. You come in, you get this thing, you get a little, nip and tuck, and we'll sew it up and all that. And then, 6 weeks, you just have to be really careful." I was like, I'm in the middle of doing this opera. I, I can't feel it. And he's like, well, you got to do this. He goes, it could come out and necrotize. If it pops out and twists, it can die, and then he's like, you got to do this. I was like, well, what other options? He's like, well, like you could wear tight underwear. And so I got a jock strap. And every night I'd come home and it feels like somebody had like kicked me in the nuts. And so I would have, like I wanted to ice it, but it's not. So I just lay there in agony every night. And then I think this is why we had all those trusses that were stylish because we didn't have the operations. Like I look at those old French bullshit things. I think it's from people having hernias. I was like, oh, that's why, because I wanted one of those, but instead I just would wrap myself in, like ace bandages and wear a jock strap and tight underwear. And um, but no, I feel like it cost so much emotionally and physically. Like anytime I do, it's like that. It's a marathon, and I feel sometimes like doing these projects. It's like it's almost PTSD for how much work it takes. Like same with the animation. Like I can't watch, a film from Leica because I know how much work it is. And it just like hurts how hard it is to make those things. I mean, the amount of artistry, and those guys are so good. The stuff that's coming out of there is so smooth and so beautiful. I mean, it's beyond what we were doing back then. They've elevated the art form, but I see it and it's like, I know what that costs. I don't know. I don't. I mean, yeah, I was lucky. Like with the opera, it sold out. We had a 2 week run and then extended that, and we were selling out every night. I mean, like word of mouth was good on it. Um, and then they had the hall booked for somebody else, so we couldn't. We would have kept going if we could have. Uh, but yeah, it takes like you really have to dive in if you want something to go well.
You got to put
Um,
in that work. Like you were talking
yeah,
about earlier, it's about the work, the effort, putting in that work.
and that's scary. Yeah, yeah, and I'm like now I'm working on doing a kind of a memoir book, and it's like all of a sudden I've started reading all these books on hippie communes and the Black Panthers and Jim Jones. Those are the three storylines that I want to have. And it's like, wow, this is so much work that I don't, but it's terrifying. And it's like, I know I'm going to fail. Like,
For anybody who thinks that the like those are coming out of nowhere, those are all references to Shannon's younger days. He had a very interesting childhood, to say the least, from what I understand. And man, I'm looking forward to. Is it going to be a, novel or a graphic novel or?
yeah. And I guess a graphic novel, but I was
Okay.
getting discouraged because I'm doing it episodically. So there are these little stories that I have and I'm piecing them together. So there's, Huey Newton
Interesting.
was my landlord and I'm hanging out with my dad. my stepdad, and I'm telling him about, this Frederica Newton who's our, collecting the rent, and he's like, Frederica Newton, he's like, that's familiar. Um, she's not married to Huey Newton. I'm like, yeah, yeah, why? And I had no idea that he was ahead of the Black Panthers, and this is in Berkeley. And he just said, pay your rent on time. He did, just pay your rent. I'm like, what? So he started telling me Black Panther stories. So, my interaction is tangential, and it's not an arc, but it's a funny little story, and it's a snippet, and it's something that builds because I think it it flows with this idea of the 60s and the 70s. And Huey Newton was somebody that was wanting to fix society. He wanted to save the world. And then he becomes a landlord and then a crack addict and then gets shot in a drug deal. Like, it's a complicated story. Um, but it as a snippet, it works. I don't have an arc for him. Um, Jim Jones is another one who wanted to save the world, but obviously ended badly. Um, and my dad's hippie commune, those hippies were wanting to save the world, and most of them have kind of not done the revolution, that they wanted. But I learned the word rhapsody, so I didn't have a big arc, and that's been bumming me out, and I didn't know how to do it. But I it's in that 500 rock history in 500 songs, or history of rock in 500 songs, and he talked about um, Bohemian Rhapsody, and he's leading into the Beach Boys, and he talks about it being a series of short pieces that builds into something bigger. And so I always thought Rhapsody meant like an ode where you're praising, and I thought Bohemian Rhapsody was like this praising of, uh, got a moose or whatever the weird lines are. But it's five little songs that are pieced together. I mean, I guess it's a pun because it's both, but um, and that's given me like, okay, I can do this and make it a rhapsody in that sense of having these little pieces, and each one has an arc. And then that's how I want to approach this, in the same way that I approached doing the comic book of like, I'm going to do these little 8-page pieces and then like bricks lay them together to make a building. So anyway, that was a recharge this last week. But it is a marathon.
Dude, I'm looking forward to it. Just from talking to you, I have so many great stories, man. Like, I'm so bummed out. We lost the story about Brubaker because I was like, wait, what the fuck? Did you just say Ed Brubaker and you're rolling
Yeah,
around in a car with Al Columbia? Like
I know.
I could sit and talk to you forever, man, because it's like you keep dropping little things and I want to explain everything to everyone because it's like, well, you're like, well, my dad's, commune. And it's like, wait a minute, did we just bring up your dad's commune, Jim Jones, and your childhood with Huey
Right.
Newton all in one fucking little 4-minute capsule there? Because we
Yeah.
did. Because Shannon's led a life.
But I
Um,
haven't. I mean, that's the thing, is that I am the boring guy, and I've just been
what?
around other people that are smart and have done things. But, I
Oh my God. I was dating the ballerina, and then later I had to go to the performance where her picture was all around me. And what are you talking about? Yeah, I made a Converse commercial in 1993. So
yeah.
dude, you've lived an amazing life. Like you,
Well, I
and
appreciate that.
like listening to stories from you is the absolute best because I always got the feeling that not necessarily your writing was like the antithesis of your personality, but it was like this very intensely personal part of yourself that you were working out on page and dealing with, but that like if I were to ever meet you, you would just be like the sweetest, most outgoing, like thoughtful, crazy, wacky guy. And like that is totally what's coming across. It's like you know everybody and everybody seems to dig you. I
Yeah,
always heard great shit about you from everybody. I
well,
can't
that's
wait
sweet.
for your book because I hope some of these stories make it in there, man. I need more of these. Like I could sit and talk to you for hours. Tell me stories. Just tell me funny stories. Bring me the funny stories.
I'm trying. I'm trying to get the book out. Oh, I'm getting as many as I can in there.
But you know, talking just like I don't want to keep you for too much longer. I know we've been talking for a while and I don't want to beat you over the head with stuff. But you know, as far as when I was looking at interviews, they're either very analytical, very dry, and very short, or they focus on a very specific, finite point in your career. So I wanted to touch on a lot of stuff. I think we've gotten most of what I want in here. I would love to talk a little bit about your childhood and your upbringing. It's like Mike Allred, who has a very interesting upbringing as well. And I'm interested to hear firsthand about it, which I haven't read a lot in depth about. And I'm interested to hear, despite you describing yourself as a boring guy and not having lived a life or whatever, how that's played into your initial approach and what some might interpret as a brazenness to create, to manifest, to put things out.
Um, yeah, I mean, I grew up in Berkeley and we grew up in the hills, but it wasn't fancy. Now it's become, um, and that's one of the little stories I want. I was taking a Uber up into the hills and trying to explain to the driver how weren't wealthy, even though like going to the wealthy part of town. Um, yeah, it was just, my mom was a hippie in the 60s, and my dad had a commune in Northern California. Uh, and yeah, it took so my mom has always sort of been in places that are oddly connected. She saw Elvis in her high school gym when she was in, like, and now she told me she saw him a couple times. I said, what the heck? And then in college, she was hit by lightning. Um, just being in the right, I don't know, wrong place in a place. So she's always been had a curiosity to her, so that when I was a kid and growing up in Berkeley, like she's like, oh, Jim Jones is giving, he's talking, he's popular. We should go see him. So we went and saw Jim Jones a few times, not because we were following the cult, but because it was something that was happening. And that's where like the Jim Jones thing ties in because, I do remember drinking the Kool-Aid. And I mean, it wasn't Kool-Aid, it was just a sugar drink or whatever. But it wasn't in Guyana, it was in, so every time people say, oh, don't drink the Kool-Aid or you drank the Kool-Aid, it's like, yeah, I literally, but it's creepy. I mean, it's, like, and it's kind of funny that that's a cultural expression that people don't even know that this was a mass suicide. Um, in that when I think back, every single person that was there is probably dead, and most of them probably died horribly. And it's like that memory now. I'm surrounded by ghosts, and that's kind of, it's weird. It's really weird. But boring is for the most part. I mean, like my mom is pretty boring, and you know, I'm she didn't like, oh, let me explore alternative lifestyles, and we weren't part of anything weird. Her superpower was just being stable and boring, and then going and seeing Jim Jones or hooking up with a hippie commune, and we'd go and visit and stay there. And um, but I didn't. We weren't living there. We would just go and visit. And I went and
Oh,
lived
okay.
there. I went and lived there like in college. I went and lived with my dad. And then later he had a hip replacement and I went and took care of him for a bit. So I spent a lot of time there with the hippies. Uh, And there's some funny stories, you know, taking acid on a hippie commune, but it's nothing like ego death when you when you're not ready for it. But I don't know. It's basically it's boring though. I mean, like there is something that's really like, oh, let me just do this work on this comic, and that's what I want to do. So I'm not like a thrill seeker to go and get.
Well, I didn't mean that you were a thrill seeker, but you as okay, let me try to frame this a different way. I suffer from very severe social anxiety and like even agoraphobia. It for me, like leaving the house and interacting with people is very difficult. Like the channel has been very good for me. And getting to speak to guys that I literally have grown up idolizing, like yourself, has put a lot of wind in my sails, so I don't feel quite as constrained as I once did. But I will even say that, like, getting back to again bringing up fucking Mike Allred again somehow a third time in this interview. Um,
He's great. You can
well,
bring
he's
up anybody.
amazing.
He's a mensch. I mean, he's solid.
He is. He's a wonderful guy. But yet, when I was invited out to his to participate in the documentary, even though it was monetarily not feasible for me, like people made it possible. They were like, I will pay for your plane ticket because we think you are a good enough comics historian. We believe in the channel. We'll make this happen for you. It was something that I didn't expect. And when that happened, I still found it hard for me, not having left the house in almost 10 years to do anything, to go to Mike's house and have this once in a lifetime experience with these amazing people that I knew was going to be great. It was very hard for me to embrace that, to
Yeah.
try to live life to the fullest. You, however, seem to have the ability to convalesce with your surroundings and very much remain in your own headspace while getting in tune with the world around you. And that's what I mean by you living a real life. You have so many friends and so many incredible stories. I think that's because of the way that you live life. If I'm going to do an opera, I'm going to fucking do an opera. I'm going to spend 3.5 years and emotionally like bank and like just destroy myself and come up on the most emotional high end on the other side. Because I feel like you had to have taken a ton away from that experience.
Yeah. No, it was a real privilege, and but like I said, it's working with people that know what they're doing, who are good, and that's the real privilege of it. Is
Having the
like,
ability to work with them is an ability in and of itself, though. A lot of people can't get out of their own way. Even if
yeah.
even if you're playing that card, I would say that, Shannon. Most people don't know how to get out of their own way.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. The grass is always greener, though. I'll say that too. Let me put that out there.
Oh, well,
Um,
I didn't mean to. I just mean that I find it very commendable and really, really refreshing the way that you approach life and like just hearing you talk about people, your genuine affection and your recollections and stuff. Really fucking nice to hear. Super appreciate you sharing all of these great stories.
it's a
Um,
blast. I love it.
so the last thing that I do kind of want to hit on is Too Much Coffee Man collections. Last few years, I know you've been putting a lot of like thought, footwork into making all of your material because if you guys get into Shannon's bibliography, it is utterly mind-blowing. You have to break it down into like into his stuff that he's done as like sequential storyteller for his strips, for his single panel stuff. And it's really awesome that all of this stuff that's gotten published from all over the place is finally getting collected. Can you talk a little bit about that, Shannon?
Yeah, I did the first 9 comic books, and I put that into a little book. And my idea is that I'm gonna I mean, the Kickstarter has, it's like, oh, I can foot a 7 grand printing bill with a Kickstarter now, and that's an easy in. And then um, that's the first book, was the first 9 comics. Although I skipped 2 issues, so there's 2 issues that don't exist because I was starting to work on number 6, and it was really boring, and I was like, this is just filling, so I just skipped ahead. Um, but then I write these little essays that contextualize, hey, this is what was happening, when, why, and how I skipped these issues, because I thought it was funny to create the rarest comic books ever. Like that, because rarity is what makes something valuable, I guess. And so I just thought, I don't know. I mean, shot, I shot myself in the foot in terms of like selling a series of comics, but it's still pretty, as a gag, it's pretty good. Um, Anyways, 1 through 9. The next one is going to be the mini comics. So it'll be Saving the Universe, and then a bunch of the one-page stuff that I did for newspapers. And then after will be, I think I'll do a color book that'll have all the color comics that I did. Um, and then I'm thinking about taking the strips that I did for college and then giving them context because they're not very good. But if they have, like, if I show, like, this is what it took, like Orush giving me the advice that he gave me to lie, um, like, that's a funny story. And then these angry comic strips that I did, it explains them in a way and it makes them funnier if you see it as a counterpoint to what was going on in life. Uh, so that's like a pre Too Much Coffee Man book that I want to do. Um,
Whoa, we're gonna get a Thorn book from Wheeler. That's
yeah.
awesome. No, man, I loved it because like Thorn is not, it just doesn't read as strongly, but it's really interesting as like an artifact to be able to examine it. The only thing that I wish was that, Smith had done what you were talking about doing, which is going in and contextualizing stuff and saying like, this is why this is rough. This is how I later smoothed it out and stuff. That's awesome, man. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, no,
I'm
no.
really looking
Jeff
forward to that.
Jeff will do that at parties if you get him a beer or two.
I see my life is so boring. Yeah, Jeff Smith, I've heard him break down bone at parties. Just get a couple of beers. It's fucking, whatever.
He's a great guy. He's such a good guy. I don't, the comics are really special for that because it is like the talent that's in comics is astounding. And then it's the lack of pretension is really, I mean, even going to the New Yorker, which is like the top of pretentious comics, I go in there and like Sam Gross and Booth, like the nicest people who help and extend themselves to everybody that walks in the door. Like it's shocking how unpretentious some of
Were they
that is.
aware that you were coming from comic book? What, because you bring that up, I'm just curious. Were they aware that you were coming from comic books?
I kept all that a secret.
Okay, because I was like, man, I just don't know how someone at the New Yorker would react to like a comic book guy getting brought in.
um, but they would react with generosity and like Ross Chaz too. Like again, another there. I don't know if it's just that they feel respected and it gives them this space to be decent people. I don't know, but every person at the New Yorker that I've met has been really, I've really liked them. It's weird. Um, but I wasn't hiding it out of embarrassment or shame, or I didn't want to be pretentious. I didn't want to go in with a chip on my shoulder saying, "Oh, I'm coming in knowing what I'm doing because I did these comic books." I wanted to go in saying, "Hey, I want to be judged
Oh,
on
okay.
my, good and bad of these, I'm not trying to be anybody. I'm not trying to lift myself up." Um, and so yeah, that I think they that's how I related. But Yeah, Sam Gross, man, I miss that guy. He was funny and sharp, and he would just tell stories. I mean, I'll indulge the what my favorite Sam Gross story is the New Yorker had just started running some spot color and cartoons, and he would he'd go, these I don't understand the color in cartoons. Color, it does not make any of these comics funnier. It just it, it's a black and white comic and it reads either it's funny or it's not funny. Color does nothing. And then he pauses and says, except for cartoons about periods. Cartoons with periods in them need color. Like, fair enough, Sam Gross. That's really put it. Yeah, I have an image in my head now.
I would imagine. I,
And then sure
oh,
enough, I look back and he's like, oh yeah, he's done because he did things for the National Lampoon. It's like, oh yeah, he's done at least three period cartoons and they have spot color in them. So it's like it's not a theory.
he's not just talking out of his ass. He's actually got experience with this. I know the one time because I've used it 3 times. That's really cool to hear how because you get this perception and
Yeah,
like there's for as much as I see a lot of the derision and the separation between like superheroes and independent comic books dissolving over the last 5, 6 years,
yeah.
especially, I still see a lot of like just general misinterpretation, misinformation, and like people don't know how to approach cartoonists in general, like strip or panel cartoonists as opposed to comic book guys. And like traditionally, there's been so much vitriol back and forth because they felt
And
like they were fighting over the
yeah,
same pie. And it just doesn't, that's never felt like the case to me.
no, and I mean, hanging out with comic book guys, it's so much fun. And people, I mean, it's like Emily Flake. Oh man, she is such a blast. Yeah, just really great people. I mean, like, um, break out a sketchbook and then everybody starts drawing. Like, I was hanging out, we went to McSorley's after a New Yorker thing, and we're all drinking beer. And I told a story about going to my first comic convention and how I didn't, nobody, there was no line for me. And so I told a kid, I was like, hey, I'll draw any superhero you want taking a crap for $1. And he's like, yeah, draw the thing. So I would draw the thing's crap, and like, and it was all like a pile of rocks, and then the Silver Surfer, it was like a Slurpee thing with like silver, and um, Batman had little bats instead of flies. I don't know. It's just ran with the gag. So the kid, I did one for him, and then he brought back his friend, and then it spread out. And then by the end of that show, I mean, nobody cared about my comic at all. I had a line of kids drawing superhero shit. And then, so I tell this story. So then all the New Yorker cartoonists were all drawing superhero shit for each other. And like, that's what we're doing. And like, we're just trying to make each other laugh with like, who can draw the most ridiculous, like Galactus. And it's like a little planet with, sort of a, Wally Wood kind of lighting on this, Galactus poop. Um,
Oh,
yeah, I don't know. There's a humanity that's there for everybody. I mean,
I guess they're all
it's
people. It's just there's like this general perception, and I don't like to play into general biases and ill-conceived perceptions like that, which is why I love doing these more free-form deep dive interviews because you really hit on some interesting stuff. So I just wanted to explore that a little bit with you, man. You're one of the few guys that I know that's gone like straight from the trenches, independent publishing. You have always been involved in putting something out from an extremely early age, working with student papers, and now
no.
you kind of, you legacy. legacy stuff, man. Two-time Eisner Award winner. I mean, it's really cool to hear you talk. So,
Yeah, it's nice.
well, I appreciate you being on, man. Is there anything I missed or that you want to bring up or anything, brother?
No, I probably told way too much. I'm probably it, all sorts of trouble all over the place for I don't know what.
I
But
was just getting ready to say, I'm gonna have to drag you back on the channel in a year or two just to have you tell stories, dude. I'm just gonna throw names out you and I want associations. We'll cut it up and just put it out over the year. It'll be shorts for the YouTube for a year. Fucking
I'd love
awesome.
it. I'd love it.
Well, thank you
Yeah,
so
that's
much for
great.
being on here. For anybody who doesn't know, Shannon has an Etsy shop and a ton of his collections are in print. If you can, I do always ask, like, buy direct from the source, guys. Cut the middleman out. The collections are super cheap. They're readily available. Really and honestly and truly, don't save the $5 on Amazon if you can get them. Just go support. Seriously, support the creators, man. It's worth the extra $5 for them to get 40, 50, 60% more of that money. It's going to ensure that we see more Too Much Coffee, man, which is something that I have no doubt that we will be seeing in the future because Shannon appears to have absolutely no give up or in him at all. And I don't think we've seen the last of his madness on paper. So go out, check out the collections, and really, truly, and honestly, I want to thank you, Shannon, again for being on the channel. And guys, you know how it is. I ask only two things: keep hitting local shops and keep supporting independent creators. If you did enjoy what you saw, make sure you hit that like button. Think about getting in the comment section below and letting me know if you really enjoyed what you saw. Make sure you Hulk smash that subscribe button. If you do that, make sure you ding the little notification bell so you never miss another video or premiere. Again, if you feel like you're in a position to help the channel grow, think about using the link in the description below to sign up for my Patreon page. For as little as $3 a month, you get access to tons of behind the scenes posts, updates, exclusive content like uncut interviews, and you can even get your name in the credits. If you want to support the channel, if Patreon is not your thing, have no fear. You can finally sign up for membership right here on YouTube. Just hit the little join button and make sure to select the tier and the perks that fit you best. If that's not enough, you can also make one-time donations towards specific goals or just tip the channel using the Ko-Fi link in the description below. And you can even pick up your very own Jerk Comics shirts like the ones you see on the screen now. As always, this video was brought to you by the Jerk Broadcasting Service, as well as generous grants from the Patreon, Ko-Fi, and YouTube members you see on the screen now. I seriously want to thank every single one of you that supports the channel and helps make these videos possible, with a super special thanks to my loyal Wednesday Warriors, Channel 10, Chasen, Clinton Salvini, and Mike Dolan. I really hope the quality and content is getting better, and I can't wait to see where this next year takes us with your continued support. Thank you again for helping this crazy dream of mine become a reality, and for sticking with me. I hope you all enjoyed, maybe even learned something, and as always, I really, truly, and honestly ask only two things: keep it in those local shops, and keep reading comics.